dear Clifford. She is going to take us through this year's rentrée littéraire. Kathy, that is the literary season. It is a very important kind of back-to-school event here in France, isn't it?
Yes, a major date in the literary calendar here in France. This period between late August to October is when the French publishers release the most books that they do throughout the year, and this can be fiction, non-fiction, translations, also many French authors. And there's a real media buzz around this, and also a cultural association for French people. Many French people associate this time of year, this autumnal period, with browsing in bookstores and discovering new authors.
Yes, it's nice as you begin to feel a chill in the air. It's a good time to curl up with a good
Ideal
book, isn't it?
Yeah.
How is it all going this year so far?
Well, this year, disappointing figures with apparently the biggest, the lowest number of publications in 20 years. 524 books were counted this year by industry magazine Livre Hebdo. That's more than a 7% drop from last year, and really shows increasing fragility in this industry, even in France, which is a country we're often told is surviving the crisis better than elsewhere.
Oh, that's sad news, isn't it? All right, well, you've picked out some of your favourites. Let's start with Sorge Chalandon's Une joie féroce, which roughly translates as a fierce joy.
Yes, so this is the story of Jeanne, who is a very reserved librarian who goes off the rails. I'm very attracted to characters that misbehave and go off the rails, so this was one for me. In horrible circumstances, though, because her life falls apart. She discovers she has cancer, and then her husband leaves her. All this just a few years after their young son has died. And the author, Sorge Chalandon, he told fr24eng he was inspired to write this book by his own wife's battle with cancer.
This isn't a book about cancer, it's about how we survive. What do we do when we have cancer? And these women will decide to hold up their heads and fight. They were women who had lost their spark and who will become warriors. It's a terrible thing to say, but this is a book that was written thanks to cancer. These women will regain their lives thanks to illness.
So the book really centred around these four women and the friendship that blossoms when they meet in chemotherapy. And you might expect quite a serious, heavy book from those themes. I know I did. But from the very first pages, we're in a flash forward to close to the end of the book. And we're on the streets of Paris. The women are in disguise. They've just stepped out of a stolen car with fake weapons, and they're about to rob a high-end jewelry store. So straight off, you're hooked in, wondering how on earth did we get here from someone discovering they had cancer, this horrible, painful beginning. So.
Wow, sounds like a real page-turner, that one. All right. Let's move on to the French-British playwright. This is Alexis Michalik. This is his first novel, right?
Yes. So you might have heard of his play Edmond, which has been a huge hit here in France. The novel is called Loin, or Far in English. It's the story of Antoine, whose father disappeared when he was a young child. And then in his mid-20s, he discovers a postcard which had been lost in the post, but which had been sent by his father after his disappearance. So armed with this clue, he sets off with his best friend and his younger sister on a sort of voyage of discovery. So I really enjoyed this. I love the dialogue. No surprise that Michalik writes great dialogue. I also really enjoyed the narrative style. It's written from the point of view of, not from Antoine's point of view, but from his best friend Laurent's point of view. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting perspective. Also, really, it's a witty novel, but also much deeper things going on, like this exploration of a really close emotional friendship between two men, delving into the theme of identity through the prism of travel.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because you hear a lot about female friendships, don't you? You don't really see so much about the male friendships. All right. Well, his is just one of 82 debut novels out this year, right?
Yes. Another one is Le Bal des Folles by Victoria Mass, or you could translate that as the Mad Woman's Ball. So it's set in late...
That sounds like one for me.
Well, I can lend it to you. Set in late 1800s Paris in an asylum at the Salpêtrière Hospital, which still exists today.
Yes, I know it, yeah. I know where it is.
Yes. So back then, on the whim of a male relative, a woman could easily be be locked up just for being slightly eccentric or for having
I'm
some
thinking of
sort
Camille
trauma.
Claudel, which comes to mind.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And all these things being diagnosed.
It's a good place to put embarrassing women, wasn't it?
Exactly. Hysteria. Female
Hysterical
hysteria.
women, yes.
Exactly.
That's right.
So there was a famous French neurologist called Dr. Charcot who would hold these public workshops where he would hypnotise these women and Parisians would crowd round to watch. It sort of was a competition to the theatres. And they had an annual ball where people would come to watch these women waltzing around in their ball gowns. This is the historical setting for the novel. Fictional characters revolves around Eugénie, who ends up in this asylum when her father discovers that she believes she can speak to the dead. Well, in the book, she really can speak to the dead. I do love a ghost story, but in this particular context, I felt there was already such a rich setting as it was. I would have liked to hear more about the women and their lives and their treatment in the asylum.
Rather than the story of that
the
individual.
storyline of this sort of speaking to the dead, supernatural storyline.
Yes, because the subject matter sounds fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was still a really nice novel. I raced through it and some beautiful descriptions of Paris in the 19th century. And the book's already won a few prizes, so definitely a debut novelist to watch.
All right, some great suggestions there. Thank you very much, our resident bookworm, Cathy Kadir-Clifford. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a short break. Don't go away. More news and headlines.